The student rode her bicycle and disappeared without a trace. The police launched a search, but none of them could have imagined the disturbing revelations that awaited them. In just a few days, so many shocking details emerged in the case that even seasoned FBI agents were horrified, and none of them expected such an ending. Sierah Joughin was born on February 11, 1996, in the small American town of Delta, Ohio. The girl grew up in a very large and friendly family. She had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. Sierah loved to play sports and was on the school volleyball team. She also loved to travel. The girl dreamed of visiting Italy and put a lot of effort into making that wish come true until she finally managed to go there. During her studies, she started dating a guy named Josh. After graduating high school, they went to different universities. Sierah planned to get a job with her uncle, who owned a metal fabrication company, and the young woman decided to major in human resources. She enrolled at Toledo University, located 50 kilometers from her home. Despite the distance, she and Josh planned to keep dating and made plans for their future. The couple even began to take their time choosing engagement rings for their future wedding. After 2 years at university, the young woman went to her hometown for a summer vacation. At that point, she still had some schoolwork to close, but she decided to do it from home so she could spend more time with her family and her boyfriend. In addition to that, Sierah was also doing an internship with her uncle's company. She was in her 20s at the time, and the young woman was thoroughly preparing to work there after graduation. On July 19, 2016, Sierah decided to drive to her boyfriend's house. She had bought a new bike a few days before, and she couldn't wait to try it out. The young woman left the house at about 5 p.m. and headed toward Josh's house. Around 9 p.m., her mother came home and found her daughter not there. This struck her as a little strange. She thought Sierah would have come home by now, but it was summer and it was just starting to get dark outside. Besides, the young woman was already in her 20s and her mother didn't worry about it. She had assumed that her daughter would stay at the boyfriend's house, but that all changed when Josh called her at 10:30 p.m. He asked if Sarah was home, since the boyfriend couldn't reach her. According to the young man, they broke up at about 7 p.m. and she hasn't been in touch since. Considering that more than 3 hours had passed since then, the young woman's mother began to get seriously worried. Together with Josh, they started calling friends and relatives of the young woman, hoping she had stopped by one of them. But no one had seen her that night. Then the mother called all the nearby hospitals, but there was no one there either. Eventually, the woman decided to go to the police, and around midnight, she filed a missing persons report. Despite the fact that Sierah was 20 years old, the police immediately began their search. Given that Josh was the last person to see her, they went to him. The guy said that the young woman arrived at his house shortly after 5 p.m. After about an hour and a half, they decided to go for a ride together. Sierah rode her bike and Josh rode his motorcycle. The couple rode along country roads, along numerous cornfields. Josh even took a picture of Sierah on her bike, and the young woman posted it on social media. After riding around for a while, they decided to go their separate ways. Sierah and Josh separated about a mile away from her house. The guy rode back on his motorcycle, and she headed home on her bike. While the police talked to the young man, other officers drove around looking for Sierah. They headed for the road near where the young woman had begun her journey home alone, and soon they were able to spot the first disturbing tip-off. As they drove along the road along the fields, one of the officers saw that the corn stalks in one place were heavily pinched, as if someone had waded through them. He He walked over there with a flashlight and after a few yards saw Sierra's bicycle. On examining it, the policeman saw traces of blood on the handles and seat. Next to the bicycle was a woman's sock, which also had bloodstains on it. He reported the find to his colleagues, and soon other police officers arrived on the scene. On closer inspection, they found several other items not far from the bike. There were men's sunglasses, a screwdriver, and some car fuses. Just as interesting was the fact that motorcycle tire tracks led to the bicycle across the cornfield. All this was enough for the investigators to come to a disappointing conclusion. It was likely that Sierah had been stolen. As the case took a serious turn, they began to look closely at Josh as a possible suspect. First of all, statistically speaking, it is the people closest to them who are most likely to turn out to be the perpetrators. Secondly, that night Josh was riding a motorcycle, and next to the bike Sierra found similar tire tracks. Besides that, the detectives wondered why the guy didn't walk the young woman home. She had less than a mile to go, and he was on a motorcycle and could have gotten home quickly anyway. Josh allowed the police officers to look around his house, his car, and his motorcycle, and that's where the officers came across his work overalls, which showed signs of blood. The young man said he wore the clothes when he was hunting, and the blood belonged to animals. Investigators turned the overalls over to experts, and they quickly confirmed that he was telling the truth. Otherwise, there was nothing to suggest Josh was involved. The experts also examined the items found in the field and extracted one DNA sample from them that belonged to an unknown person. Josh immediately volunteered his sample, and they did not match. As a result, he was no longer considered a suspect, and the police started looking for other leads. The next day, they received a call from a farmer. The man told them that on the evening of Sierra's disappearance, he was driving down the same road with his son. At one point, they noticed a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road, and the father told his son to bring it to the car. The farmer later examined it more closely and saw traces of blood on it, and then contacted the police. Detectives admitted that the helmet may have belonged to the kidnapper, but his identity remained a mystery. At this point, the FBI was already involved in the case, and the agents decided to take a close look at the photo that Josh had taken of Sierra shortly before her disappearance. Thanks to the photo, they knew what kind of clothes she was wearing, but the detectives noticed something else. The young woman was wearing a fitness bracelet on her wrist. They immediately requested geolocation data for the device, but here the investigators were unsuccessful. The device had been turned off shortly after Sierra disappeared. The police received another tip shortly thereafter. Josh told them that as he and the young woman were driving down the road, a suspicious white van followed them. The guy got the feeling that the driver was following them. The vehicle was traveling at a slow speed and slowed down when the couple slowed down. At one point, Josh even tried to drive up to him, but the driver pulled away. The guy thought it was strange, and he even remembered part of his license plate number. The police quickly found the vehicle and its owner. She turned out to be a woman, and detectives determined that she had nothing to do with the crime. During the conversation, she herself accused Josh of trying to drive up to her and push her off the road. As a result, investigators decided that there had simply been a miscommunication between them and continued to look for more leads. Several days had passed since Sierra's disappearance, but the police were still unable to find any additional clues. Then, they decided to go through all the residents who had been previously convicted of violent crimes and lived in nearby communities. Going through the list of these people, they immediately noticed one man, 57-year-old James Worley. He lived only a few kilometers from the field where Sierra's bicycle was found. The reason the police were so interested in him was very simple. James had been convicted of kidnapping a young woman in the 1990s. She was riding her bicycle when suddenly a man ran over her in his van. Threatening her with a screwdriver, he tried to force the young woman into the car, but she managed to escape. Given that Sierah disappeared during the bike ride and the screwdriver found next to him, police quickly suspected James of kidnapping her. Investigators went to him to verify this theory. The man was clearly unhappy about the visit and stated that he had not killed anyone. Nevertheless, he voluntarily allowed the officers to inspect his home. James and his mother lived on a 120-acre farm, and there were many different structures on this huge property. It took the detectives a long time to look at them all. During this process, James kept repeating to the police that he had not kidnapped Sierah and had only heard about the case from the news. This behavior began to seem strange to them. The man was literally repeating the same thing over and over again. But something more interestingly awaited them next. Suddenly, James said that on the night of Sierah's disappearance, he had just driven along that road and his motorcycle had stalled near the very spot where the police later found the young woman's bicycle. According to James, he saw her bike and decided to get closer, so he headed into the field, pushing his motorcycle nearby. The man added that as he walked there, his car fuses, sunglasses, screwdriver, and helmet fell out. Suddenly, his motorcycle started up again, and James drove on, forgetting to pick up all those items. As you might have guessed, the detectives were very suspicious of this story. In addition, just a few hours earlier, a witness had approached them and said that the evening of Sierah's disappearance, he had seen a strange van on that road. The witness noticed it because the vehicle was driving at a very high speed, breaking all possible rules. He memorized the license plate number and gave that information to the police. After running the plates, detectives learned that the van belonged to James, and during a search, they spotted it near the house. The man also allowed them to examine the van, and the officers found something of interest. Inside were a ski mask, duct tape, plastic clamps, handcuffs, and a mace. The items themselves did not in any way indicate his guilt, but given James' criminal record for kidnapping, such a set made investigators suspicious. But the creepiest finds awaited them in one of the barns. Detectives found a separate room where behind a hidden door, inside which was an air mattress. Beside it were chains that looked as if they had been designed to keep a person in the room. Next to the mattress was a refrigerator, inside of which the police found traces of blood. There was also a strong smell of bleach, from which they deduced that the blood had been thoroughly cleaned. But the main clue was the contents of a small box. There were bras and several pairs of women's underwear, one of which had blood on it. All this was enough to arrest James, at least temporarily, while experts examined the collected evidence. The man was taken in for questioning and asked to explain the secret room with the blood and chains. In response, James gave them another dubious story. He said he had made the room because he wanted to set up his own studio to shoot adult material, so it was just his improvised film set. Of course, the detectives didn't believe what he said. The room looked as if it had originally been made to hold people against their will. Nevertheless, they still could not connect it to Sierah's disappearance, nor could they determine her whereabouts. But that all changed on the third day after her disappearance. During a lengthy search, the police found a freshly dug grave in a field that contained Sierah's body. Her hands were handcuffed, and the young woman had a large plastic toy in her mouth. She was also wearing an adult diaper. Medical examiners determined that the victim died from strangulation, but they were unable to determine even the approximate time of death. In addition, they did not find any signs of violence. Around the same time, forensic scientists were actively examining all the evidence collected from James' barn. They found female DNA on one of the pieces of duct tape lying next to the mattress, and it matched Sierra's DNA. The cops also obtained geolocation data on James' smartphone. It turned out that on the night of the young woman's disappearance, he had spent almost 2 hours near that location. They received another disturbing piece of evidence from the psychologist James had court appointed for a previous abduction. According to him, during one of his sessions, James stated that he was learning from his mistakes with each new abduction, and that next time he was going to bury the bodies. Apparently, the psychologist decided not to inform the police of such disturbing statements made by his client and did so only after he had been accused of murder. With this set of clues, the detectives formed the most likely chronology of events. Apparently, James spotted Sierra on the road that night, hit her with his helmet, and dragged her into a field with his bicycle. Based on his geolocation data, the man sat there until the sun went down. During that time, he called his brother and told him that his motorcycle had broken down. Apparently, this was his way of creating an alibi. As soon as it got dark outside, James drove home, got off his motorcycle onto his van, and returned to the field, picked up Sierra, and took her to his barn. At that point, the young woman was either unconscious or restrained. What happened next only James knew. He apparently abused the victim for some time before killing her and burying her in a field. Experts only speculated that the victim may have been there for 3 days. The man himself continued to deny all of these allegations, and the case went to trial. The trial began in March 2018 with the prosecution presenting additional evidence that further pointed to his guilt. It turned out that the key to the handcuffs placed on the victim's hands was found on James' keychain. His lawyers decided to stick with the theory that James simply wanted to set up an adult film studio in his barn, and the cops pulled that into the murder. However, they did not provide any adequate arguments for their client's innocence. The trial ended in less than a month, and on March 28th, the jury found him guilty. As a result, James received the death penalty. His execution scheduled for May 20th, 2025. Of course, this story was far from over for the detectives. Given everything they had learned about the man, the police were certain that James had committed similar crimes before, but he had managed to avoid responsibility. Investigators were still working on his case, trying to tie the unsolved disappearances to James, but it had yet to yield concrete results. The victim's parents established the Sierra Scholarship and also participated in the creation of a bill that would have required the state to make an open registry of people previously convicted of murder and kidnapping. The bill was quickly supported and went into effect on March 20th, 2019. Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Thanks for watching.